Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Show to V with Mike G, the show of a life, the show of Brazil, the show of a classical piano, practicing law, Houston, D.C., New York, but above all of these other things, today's conversation with Nate Casablanca Whitehouse of Avua is about cachaça. Avua, cachaça, one of the more delicate and beautifully packaged cachaças I've ever seen, and I must share with you that the night prior to my wedding, I and a few others consumed an entire bottle of the Avua&nbsp, aged in these massive 20-foot casks, this endangered wood. It's a brilliant spirit and something really worth sipping. Nate and I chat about that and much more, and so I hope you guys enjoyed this chat with Nate Casablanca Whitehouse, co-founder of Avua Cachaça. You're on stage.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's so cool.
You're really, and you're trying to, what I find interesting is, with music, like I studied classical music, is my main thing.
Oh, wow.
And what you're trying to do is you're trying to take this culture and you're trying to summon it and express it to someone else, right?
Yeah.
And that's very similar to what I feel like I'm doing with this. It's like, what is that emotion that people have around Brazil? What is that beautiful experience?
Oh, yeah.
And taking it and almost distilling it into an experience and then trying to get it out there to the world.
Man, yeah, that's beautiful. Because for a minute I was like, "Oh, you're talking about the cachaça." Like, no, music's the same way. You think about it, it totally is. It totally is. So, speaking of because I love classical, we talk about the piano downstairs, and my mom tossed me into piano lessons at the bright old age of 9 years old. And, I am very thankful.
As happens.
I love it. I love that she did that. I didn't like it at the time. Like, I don't want to play piano. I play guitar like a real man. The guy that gets all the chicks. That never worked ever. By the way. But so, what were some of the guys that really were influential for you compositionally? Yeah.
I think that for me, there's the great three, Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, or Mozart maybe, and Bach I think is probably the most influential because he the way he thinks about music is so refined, and so complex that everything else kind of stems from that.
Gotcha.
It all kind of descends from that in a certain way.
Yeah, Beethoven certainly does.
Beethoven certainly does.
Brahms, I would say, is Brahms a contemporary of Beethoven or shortly after? I can't remember exactly.
Maybe about 50, 60 years.
Something like that, pretty like close. That. But Bach certainly at the tail end of the Baroque period into classical, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
To get academic for a second.
Yeah. But I also really, I always loved I love Brazilian music.
Yeah.
I really kind of got, more kind of the popular stuff like the Tropicalia, Bossa Nova. And that's I think was the first thing that really drew me towards Brazil.
Oh, really? Was it the off-time signatures? Because those are often swung in a sense, right? What is it, like a 3/4/6/8 kind of thing typically? It's not to get in theory too much, but it is
that's
swung.
It's moving,
I don't know.
But I do know that I had a music teacher one time who was Brazilian, a piano teacher. Let's say a guy who gave me a few lessons, Joseph Figali out of Fort Worth, and he was, won the Van Cliburn competition, had this kind of brilliant classical mind, but also had a really deep, innate understanding of these Brazilian rhythms. And he was like, you'll go to these small villages in Bahia, and people are playing 7 against 5, without even thinking about it. And that really kind of put the seed in my mind about what is so interesting about this culture.
Yeah.
And then over the years, I just started really loving Caetano Veloso and Os Mutantes and all these kind of amazing Brazilian acts that came out. And then when I first had the chance to go to Brazil, that was
Did
it.
it just unlock? Did the door just open?
Yeah.
Just enabled you. You're like, this is it. I get it. It's all clear now.
It all kind of came together.
That's amazing culturally. And then I absolutely want to get to how you discovered Brazil, how you got introduced into sugarcane spirits and cachaça in particular. But you're a Texas guy, is that fair? You said you're from Fort Worth. Is that right?
I grew up in Fort Worth. Yeah, kind of a military brat. So
where'd you guys move? Kind of all over the place then.
A little bit.
What branch?
By the time, Air Force.
Air Force.
My dad was a pilot in the Air Force, and we ended up landing in Fort Worth.
That's a good pun, by the way. That was really good.
Do my best. From Texas originally, and basically grew up here and was here until I was 25, 26.
Oh yeah.
And
then, you said you went. So I always wonder, because we're all, it's so strange. Here are like a couple of the large archetypes that I've found out in the multiple conversations that I've had with people, and it's lovely. I love it. I love that love drives much of the movement and much of the career choices. Right?
Absolutely.
Moving for a girl, which happened. 2, leaving music. That's the other one. That's a huge.
That's super
Genesis
interesting,
story, right?
That's super interesting.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. You look at like Omar.
Yeah,
from 86.
I know.
Like he was
touring with Rev.
Yeah, exactly.
I was just like, when oh man, I can't wait to post that episode up. We had a good chat with him.
That's awesome.
Him talking about playing the rig from Craig from the Descendants, like his bass rig. I was like, oh shit, that's how we started off the conversation.
Oh
like,
man,
this is going to be a good conversation.
That's awesome.
It is, right? Like, yeah, absolutely. Omar, Justin Elliott, he played. Florian, he played. Yeah, all these dudes are music guys.
You know what's interesting too? Like one of the people who really kind of was the guiding light for us as far as Avua was this bar owner from New York. His name is Mike Neff. He owned Ward 3. Like he owns Holiday Cocktail Lounge. Like he's a very well known New York bartender.
Yeah.
I knew the guy for years. Like,
how did you know him?
Richly through friends of a friend, and then he became really kind of a mentor to me and my business partner in lots of ways.
Yeah.
But I was everybody loves Mike. He's this great kind of wonderful personality, incredible bartender, incredible bar like a impresario kind of.
Yeah.
But I was driving around with him in Los Angeles one time, and he's like, when I used to write plays, and I was like,
right.
And this guy was a published playwright. Like he's had stuff performed in like Scotland and England and in Seattle and New York, and like. It really kind of it was interesting the way he talked about like writing for actors, and that's almost like you're setting the stage. A bar is kind of setting the stage for this nightly drama,
right?
It's really interesting. Kind of
everybody has their marks.
Exactly.
They totally do. No wonder he transitioned into that. It's seriously either the world is playing a massive prank on me by having everything being connected.
Yeah.
Which is maybe it's a big hologram. I don't know. A couple people will think it is.
Yeah,
or that's just how hospitality is. It is a parallel career and a parallel set of skills, much to that of performing in music, much to that in writing and performing on stage. It's crazy, isn't it?
I think that's a really interesting way, and correct perspective on it. Like it's kind of this parallel career, but it's everything is kind of linked in. I mean, maybe it's simply because it is like a truly offline, network or of people that like, how many people does a bartender talk to in one day?
Oh man.
Maybe in a busy bar, like 1,000.
Yeah,
maybe
lots
more.
of people.
And like, you don't develop relationships with those people, but the level of connection that person has is so interesting in our modern society, where sometimes we're like kind of like siloed one from the other.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, I mean, in some ways it's really surprising that everyone knows one another, but at the same time it's kind of like not surprising in a way too, like.
It's so, do you ever wonder, and one of the things that's been, of course the show is filled with tangents, which I love because we're talking about whatever, right? But one of the things that's really, really amazing to me is the things that I've been able just to talk to people about their lives in this industry, pre-industry, post-industry, whatever, that their friends don't even know. And that goes to show you that like kind of being in that spot and performing and getting into that groove, or like, all right, I'm ready for my close-up, right? That sometimes we only really go so deep. You know what I mean? Like,
that's interesting.
We only go back a year, or we only go back 2 years, and we never really go back and think about who we were that came to be. Like, how did we get to this place? And that's the stuff that's the most fascinating, is like, oh, well, and I was a touring musician for with freaking Omar. Like he was a touring musician. He was touring, doing tour managing and stuff. It's like, that makes so much sense. He's already equipped.
Yeah, I mean, that is really interesting because it's almost like, in your life, there are these certain fulcrum points.
Yeah.
And you go through and maybe there's like people that you knew from before and people you knew after. And like a lot of times there's overlap.
Sure.
But people almost don't even think about that fulcrum point. They're not even like, why did I make this move?
That's totally right.
Like half the time, I look back at my own life, like, I don't know why I made that move,
Yeah.
And then you look back at the years later and you're like, oh, okay, maybe that's why. I don't know.
Maybe it's foggy until it's not anymore. Maybe when the dust clears. Maybe it was just this massive destructive thing that kind of set you on your way. And then once all the ashes and the smoke settles, like, oh, now I get it. I see it.
Oh, okay, that's or like that's what I can pull from the ashes there.
Exactly. Whether it's a good conversation or a bad one, or a good decision or a bad one. And there's a nice mix of column A and column B. There has to be,
Yeah.
Always going back to moving for a girl, which is a lot of the time.
Which is a lot of the things.
Well, so when we're talking about music. So what were you really aiming to study for then when you went to UT in Dallas or UT here in Austin?
Here in Austin.
Oh, cool. Okay. And you was straight out of high school, 18?
Yeah, straight out of high school. Basically decided, wanted to do music, and whether that was, my parents were like, well,
yeah, I was gonna say, what did your Air Force dad think about that? Because the Air Force is kind of the antithesis of being open and creative, and
I think he's always, we've come from a very musical family, so he was not sure how that would all play out for me, but he was the most supportive that I could possibly think of. And yeah, I had just loved music. Like that was the thing I loved more than anything at that point in my life, and still probably do. But ended up moving down here, studied piano performance, and just. I don't know if I knew what I wanted to do with my life.
Right. Well, who does? Yeah. Let's be serious.
When you're 18 or or even now, in my mid 30s, I'm like
slightly clear, but not that much clear.
Sure.
Did your mom or your dad play? Where did the music influence come from? That kind of maybe that genetic predisposition to playing.
It's funny. My dad is absolutely if you ever listen to this, I love you, Dad, but absolutely not musical at all. He loves music. But my sisters. I have 3 older sisters, and they're all very, very musical.
Really? They play piano as well?
They're singers, so they play bluegrass pretty seriously.
Oh, cool.
Is that
why you're in Kerrville?
Yeah, it was one of the reasons.
Oh, there we go.
Well,
okay.
in that area.
Yeah.
But yeah, they are great singers. One of my older sisters is a good guitarist, and I think that music to me always comes from the voice. Everything fundamentally arises from the human voice, and I think that's the best way to learn. To me, like how to express yourself musically, but even on an instrument. But I think that's what I really learned from them was that passion for the sound and the human voice, and how particularly they were very beautiful. They do a lot of like kind of canons. They sing together.
Oh wow!
And so that kind of.
Do they have that kind of like uncanny sibling ability to harmonize perfectly?
Yeah, it was really.
Did you feel like the odd man out almost literally?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, normally when I'm singing with them, I'm like,
okay, you guys just go sound like the sirens. That's fine.
Exactly.
I'll just poke away here at the keys. Were there any kind of genres and things that you were really into when you were growing up? We talk about classical. You mentioned some bluegrass as well. Is that predominantly the kind of stuff that you were listening to that got you kind of more motivated into music?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've kind of gone through, maybe like many people in the modern world, I've gone through lots of different genres that I loved. I mean, I think the first thing I ever really loved was like, as far as like a young kind of music aficionado was like, I remember getting Appetite for Destruction. Oh, yeah. And I was like,
right there with you. Columbia House. Thank you. Columbia
House. Exactly.
That and Countdown to Extinction I got in this thing. And I was like, I don't know if I can handle this at this age. This might change everything too quickly for me. It's like, get the pens, right? Like I can't rise this fast and I'll die. So what did that do? Did that just like open it all up?
I think that just, that really, taught me about the power of music. Like, just the way it can like change your mental state so quickly. And, it almost changes you in some ways into someone who you're not, like in a moment, which I really was found. I mean, I'm intellectualizing it now.
But but I like it. I think you're right.
But yeah, I mean that kind of led me to I liked rap a lot. So
Yeah.
like, the Ghetto Boys.
Oh yeah.
Was like one of the first albums that I got. And then I think I liked that kind of like dramatic, like
Maybe,
rock and like darker styles of music. And that's really what led me into classical music. Like
The darkest. Jeez.
Which is like
It is.
mad dark. Like
There are no lyrics, but it doesn't even matter. It'll take you to that place,
And then I just kind of fell in love with the craft of it. I mean, there's such a deep, like emotional source there,
Yeah.
but it's also like the intellectual stimulation of it, the physical stimulation. If you wanted to be really, I was talking to this with a friend who's works in the arts, and we were kind of talking about it. It's almost like if you really want to be good at music, and particularly like that style of classical music, it's almost a not to get too dramatic, but it's almost like a worship thing. Like it's like a god that you have that is very hard. It's a very harsh god.
Yeah.
But it's a very rewarding god.
Well, commitment to any
that
kind of
metaphor,
for sure.
like,
Commitment to any kind of craft like that, like a really true craft. Like to some bourbonist god. I mean, that is not a stretch.
Absolutely.
And mezcal, same thing. It defines a narrative. It defines language. I mean, it defines all of this stuff. And music is no different. And there is that difference, though. And man, I never thought we would be talking about it in this way, but that level of dedication to one thing to get it right and to be completely ensconced and enveloped in the culture, the history, the sounds, and all that, like the true artist's lifestyle, right? 'Cause that's kind of what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I feel like that's maybe what's kind of missing now. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. You look at like, why do people find going to this little Nahuatl village in Michoacan and like trying to understand like this culture? Why do we as modern gringos in the most,
right,
one of the most sophisticated economies in the world, why are we interested in seeing, how people, cut agaves by hand and search for them in the mountains? Yeah. It's because you almost lose that. Like that to me was what I found interesting about like art or classical music. It requires such incredible dedication.
And it brings you, man, so...
And the same thing.
You're totally... Oh, man, brilliant. Because it brings you closer to what the pure essence of music is. And that is emotion, a hammer, and a note, which is the simplest part, right?
And it's really interesting you say that, because I remember my piano professor here, Betty Mallard at University of Texas, who's since retired. I remember her saying this to me one time, and she doesn't even remember saying this, but she was like, just go in your practice room and for 15 minutes, hit the A key. Just hit it, let it echo, hear all the decays, and then rest, do it again. And that to me is like, that's what I find interesting about spirits, particularly something like mezcal or cachaca or something, or something that's very linked to the prime essence of the
A plus
the
B equals C. It's not hiding behind it's not hiding behind coloring. It's not hiding behind superficiality.
Yeah,
which is what a lot of things happen. Yeah. So we got to get to that part of the journey then. So you're at UT, you graduate with an undergraduate in music performance, especially in piano, I presume. And then you're like, all right, cool. Well, I'm going to go to Carnegie now. Tell me how you got out of school. Did you go back? Did you do grad work as well? Or
well, I was in probably my third year, and I and I met the girl who would become my ex-wife.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of saying it. But so we got pretty serious, and I think part of being in a relationship when you're so devoted to like an art like that is it puts things in the middle of the relationship sometimes.
You've got two partners.
You got two partners, right? Like,
did you ever see Whiplash by chance?
No.
Okay. See that? Yeah, because there's this distinct point in which this guy who's a drummer, he's a drummer, right? But anyway, he makes that choice. He's like, sorry, we can't date anymore.
Yeah.
And it's rough, and as a viewer, you're like, ooh.
You're like, oh, man. Wow.
And then he realized he fucked up, and he tries to get back. Right. So what did that continue to create more of a wedge between the three of you?
In a certain way. I mean, I think that, that started a complicated part of my life, but, I started doing a biochemistry degree as well.
Oh, really?
And then basically finished both of those. And, at the time I thought, well, I wanted to be a musician professionally, but I realized I just didn't have the chops. I realized I just wasn't, to perform at that level. And maybe that was,
What was that moment like? Because the moment that you realized maybe you're not going to make it as a musician.
It was a profoundly, depressing is not exactly the word. Maybe,
Sure.
maybe depressing
No,
is the
I
word.
bet.
Like, it was kind of like, and it's one of those like life-changing moments where you're like, okay, maybe I'm not, maybe this isn't the path for me, or maybe this path will come up for me later in life, but this is not the path for me
for now. Yeah. But that's okay, because it always comes back.
And that's the thing. It always comes back, and in my sense, I really feel like it has come back.
That's amazing.
But yeah, then I finished both those degrees, and then I went down to Houston. I worked in the medical center and the Human Genome Project for a couple of years.
Oh, amazing. At Memorial?
At Baylor.
At Baylor. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm from Houston.
Okay, yeah.
Great medicine programs down there for sure. So you work for Human Genome Project?
Yeah. For a couple of years. I mean, I was like this.
That's nothing to scoff at.
In the
That's
machine
so amazing,
there. But I was there, and that was really. It was one of those things where you kind of like, you get a lot out of it, even though it's probably not what you are meant to be doing. Like the level of brilliance that those people have who were working on those scientific basic science issues were so unbelievable.
Yeah.
And then so I did that for a couple of years, and then my wife at the time, we were married, and then we decided to go to the East to go to graduate school, and so I decided
you or her.
Or both of us.
What was she in the same you said biochemistry or chemistry? Let's call it the same program as you. Is that how in that same program you guys met?
Yeah,
Gotcha.
she always kind of wanted to be a doctor. Like,
okay.
That was her thing. And so we ended up going to graduate school at the same time. I actually went to law school, which is totally
law school
random,
too.
random thing. And again, kind of like to the point earlier, it's like looking back at these seemingly random decisions. Like you look back and you're like, oh, I don't think that makes a lot of sense. But then like you think about it. Okay,
Thanks,
at the time it makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. So where did you move? East Coast, New York?
Oh, we were in Washington D.C.
Okay. Columbia. Were you going to Columbia?
No, I went to George Washington.
Oh, well, nothing to scoff at either.
And then we were both there, and the relationship didn't work out. As these things happen. And
so, real quick, just for my sake of narrative,
sure.
You guys got married in Houston, or you got married in Austin and moved as a married couple to Houston?
Well, so we got married while we were in Austin.
Okay.
Then we moved to Houston, and then ended up moving to DC.
Gotcha. Okay. And so over the course of what, 3 years, 2-3 years?
Oh, maybe probably 3 years.
Something like that. Okay. Okay. Makes sense. All right.
And
next scene. Sorry.
Next scene. So end up being in DC. It's this guy, having grown up in Texas all my life, and it was a bit of a culture shock, I have to say.
Good or bad?
Good and bad.
Yeah.
Good and bad.
Busy. Real busy, right?
Busy. A little bit more anonymous than I had been kind of accustomed to, I think. Even like a city like Houston, which is a great global city, and lots of people from all around the world.
Sure.
I think that in Texas there's always this like sense of human interaction.
Yeah, you're absolutely. You get a wave or a smile sometimes.
Yeah.
Which is a nice kind of feeling being in Texas, But DC, I presume it wasn't like that.
Not so much like that.
Much more cold.
Much more cold. Much more, I don't know, like transactional in some ways.
I see.
And so I was there. I really, but the very great place to study, and then I ended up moving to New York, and that's kind of how the Cachaca thing happened.
So you didn't finish law school at George Washington, though? Or you did?
I did finish law school.
God, you got it all.
I don't know. I've got a lot of education.
But that's good. It's for something, and I have a feeling all it's going to sum together and make you the perfect, the nemesis, like the perfect guy to get shit done in the industry. So I presume, was the New York decision professional? Were you saying the marriage isn't working out, I got to go somewhere? Was there a particular thing that led you to New York?
I think that the thing that drew me to New York was, ostensibly for work.
Yeah.
But really, all these different things together, like these kind of dissonant parts of my life. Mm-hmm. And also like these dissonant, like you look at like different styles of music, like that I was always into. I was kind of like, well, why am I how do all these things link together?
Sure. What's the thread, man? Right? Like,
what is all this madness tying it together? And what it was the cacophony of New York.
Really?
Like it was all those different, like, this incredible Babylon of a place where people are just, doing all kinds of different things, and somehow it kind of harmonizes together in a way. Like that's always how I've kind of thought about.
It's so strange. It's almost like it's totally unencrypted. Right?
Yeah.
And it's just this weird, or rather encrypted language. You're like, I don't get it. It doesn't make sense. I mean, I can read it. Yeah. It's like, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't make any sense. But then the oddness, and you said the cacophony and the discordant nature of New York is what brought it all together. Yeah. So strange, right? The decoder key was in New York the whole time. Right.
and after I moved, it's this amazing kind of thrilling place where, all these different things are going on. It's also a very hard place, so it's kind of like you're kind of trying to work out what's going on. And that's when I met some Brazilians.
How did that go down? How do you meet? How do you just like run into some Brazilians? Was it at a bar? Was it in the subway?
It was people that I'd say a combination. I used to work with a few, and then like they were friends of friends. Mm-hmm. It's just kind of one of these like streams of people coming together.
Yeah.
And I started making friends with them, and
would you say there's one kind of identifying cultural trait for the Brazilians besides that they're all beautiful? Like, is there something anything personality-wise maybe that kind of binds them together? Like, because New Yorkers have this thing, right? There's this kind of thread that bonds all these New Yorkers together. Anything that comes to mind, like for Brazilians in general?
The best way of describing what I found lovely about Brazilians is and this was many years later, but I was in São Paulo, and I went to go meet with my friend Felipe Januzzi from Cachaca, and he had this cool little, like kind of artist space in this area of São Paulo where you had all these kind of like their bands practicing, and he had a little, cool. He's doing his cachaça, researches, and there are these two bartenders who were there, Bob and Zulu, and I started talking to them, and like we were, became friends, and all of a sudden they're like, yeah, let's go down to Itaim to have a drink, this other area of São Paulo. Mm-hmm. So we start walking, and I had messed up my ankle. Like I had twisted it or something. And so I was limping a little bit. And, I'm used to this New York kind of way at this point where it's just kind of this harsh kind of like, handle your own shit. And
right. It's not like a community, but there is a community when it's called on it. Yeah, it's exactly. So strange.
And this guy, Bob, looks over to me, and in kind of like Portuguese, Spanish, was like, with real concern in his eyes, looks over and says, "My friend, are you okay? Like, I'm worried about your ankle." And I'd known this guy for like 30 minutes maybe. But I mean, surely like it was a sense of like empathy or a sense of like connection to other people, which I think is very characteristic of Brazilians on a human level. Like there's simpatia or like compassion. Like there's just a sense of like when you sit down and you have a drink with Brazilians often, and this is probably not entirely true for everyone, but for many, many people, you always drink out of the same bottle.
Wow.
And everybody, that's been kind of a thing that's been stopping the rise of cocktail culture in Brazil, because you're all expected to drink the same thing.
Oh, wow.
And it's kind of like a sympathy thing. It's like, hey, listen, we're all kind of in this together, like
that's
friends.
Amazing.
Like we're all friends. We all love and care about one another. Or that's like the table kind of the way of sitting around a table. And so that I think is something very lovely about the culture, and that was really what drew me in.
That's beautiful. Really, it is. I mean, and I feel that same way about Hispanic culture and being in Mexico and stuff.
I think that's true for a lot.
Wait, you care?
Yeah.
Thanks, man.
Like you don't know me, but
thank you. I care right back. That's really, I mean, because that's the thing. Like we're all human, and that's one of the things I think is that you strip everything else away. You strip the titles away. You strip the money away.
Yeah.
And you strip all the status and all this. We're just people.
Yeah.
And the people that are open and honest and compassionate, we flock together. We really do.
And I think that's that's a really interesting thing. I think that's absolutely what I think is attractive about the bar industry.
Yeah,
a lot of the time,
sure.
Because or music, or like it draws people in that are able to hear what the other person's saying.
It's absolutely true. It is lovely, and I feel very privileged. One, to get to talk to people like yourself, and two, that I get somehow
included in this big melee of, of an issue, which is amazing, though. Everybody, doesn't matter where you go, Mexico, Sao Paulo, England, anywhere,
Absolutely.
And so you have this fortuitous meeting, and you kind of building these relationships with Brazilians, going back, I guess, a couple years before you have this eye-opening moment of compassion or experiencing, witnessing compassion. So what was that like? Did they introduce you? I imagine the introduction to Cachaca, had you known about it before you'd met these guys or these women?
Yeah, I mean, really, it was not necessarily those two bartenders that introduced me, but me and my business partner on Avua, we started to become like, all kind of like linked in with these Brazilian cats, and then there's this particular one spot in South Williamsburg, which is called Miss Favela, and it's in this kind of like funny zone right underneath the Williamsburg Bridge. So you have like hipster Williamsburg to the north, and you have Hasidic Williamsburg to the south. I was kind of the land between two beards, because it's kind of like
different smells in those beers. I can tell you.
That's probably true. That's probably very true. But so it's this tiny little green and yellow shack, and you walk up in the middle, and you usually go there on Saturday afternoon, and
it's because soccer's on,
or
football rather.
Well, sometimes, but it's even more like they'd have a weekly like samba or fajo brunch, basically.
Oh wow!
And so you'll just show up, and about like 1, and you'll sit down, you'll start to have some food, and gradually people start coming in, and then the band comes on, and they're a great band. Like, they're a killer like samba band, basically. And then all of a sudden, people from all over this like polyglot New York, like a lot of Latins, like a lot of Brazilians, a lot of Colombians, a lot of but just people from everywhere, Japanese people, people from Texas,
amazing,
and it's just this very tight quarters, and people are kind of like just laughing and dancing and having this super awesome human experience, and that was really where I was introduced to Cachaca. And I had some friends who were sitting over at the bar, and they called me over, and I kind of like wended my way through the crowd, and kind of like elbowing people a little bit to try and get over there. And they pour these bottles of aged cachaça, and cachaça is aged in all these weird woods, all these rare woods, and these were not in the U.S. at the time, but they had basically been brought in somebody's suitcase and put in this back bar.
It's almost like the ratio we're drinking these kinds of things.
Exactly,
yeah, it's
exactly.
Brilliant.
And basically, I tasted it, and I was like, wow, what is this? And I have to say it was the culture that originally drew me in, but then I started to really get into the cachaças, and like I wasn't from the spirits industry before. Like,
what would you drink on a normal Friday night typically?
Before then, or now?
Before that.
That's a good question. Probably beers.
Yeah.
Maybe American whiskeys. Yeah, probably like bourbon and beer. I mean, it's pretty like basic kind of like.
I mean, you're from Texas, it makes some sense, But what was it about this spirit in particular that kind of opened your eyes up a little bit?
It was just the unusual aromas of it. Like it was particularly like the kind of cinnamon tonka bean thing you get on Amburana, or like the anise that you get on a wood like balsam, or this kind of spiciness you get on ariraba. But it was more just kind of like I was just fascinated by it because I had this amazing stuff here, and then over the next few months, start going around to my normal bar crawls and being like, hey, this stuff isn't here, and so like I mean like that same kind of quality of distillate,
right? So maybe it was there, but it just wasn't as good. I mean, that's what people. Mezcal is a great parallel again. Is that people are like, oh yeah, it's got the worm in it. Like, no, it doesn't. It can't have the worm in it, but but that's not the stuff that I've had. It's like brilliant stuff. So you get like a substandard until someone comes in and says, I'm bringing in the good stuff.
And that's, I think, really what, kind of inspired this. Like, Pete and I at some point were like, well, let's just go down to Brazil.
Yeah.
Mostly to check it out. But let's also tour around some cachaça distilleries. And I remember, we just had a kind of a lucky thing that happened. And I called up my friend Marta, who was a Brazilian from Carioca, from Rio. This kind of like sweet, lovely person. And I was like, hey, Marta, do you know anybody that knows anything about cachaça? I'm going down to Brazil to hang out. Who do you know?
Yeah.
And she said, you're in luck. One of her best friends was getting married to this great bartender and cachaça expert in Rio.
Oh, amazing.
André Cerqueira. And so, ended up going down to Brazil, and like this guy was the coolest guy you can possibly imagine. Like, he's like this, or he passed away actually, but he was this really big kind of intense personality and almost almost like intimidating,
Yeah.
in his intensity, but like just the sweetest person.
Right.
And he ended up showing us around to like 40 different distilleries,
Wow.
took 6 days off work, we're tasting cachaças with him until 6 a.m. every morning. His girlfriend hated us by the end of it, but and
Did it make sense then? Did it say like,
Yeah.
it finally, because it's kind of like knowing how the sausage is made.
yeah,
You know what I mean? It's like I've been enjoying sausage for years. And like, now I know how you blend the meats and the kind of casings and stuff. At that point, you were excited about it, and would you come back with? Were you just full of ideas, like entrepreneurial ideas, or just like I just got to bring some back in my suitcase kind of thing?
it was kind of maybe as the entrepreneurial idea was forming.
Yeah.
Probably.
I want this
more
thing.
and more. It's like I
Right.
want this thing, and Pete and I put together like probably 50, 60 bottles and spread them out in our suitcases,
Yeah.
and kind of prayed that the customs wouldn't take them from us. And we brought them back to the States, and then we just started going around to like friends basically in bars and being like, hey, listen, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And the one that kept standing out was the producer who we currently work with. And I really enjoyed her as a person.
Is it a female distiller?
It's a female distiller.
amazing.
It's one of the probably 3 in Brazil.
That's great. I mean, for the population
That I know of,
you think
yeah.
about this, it's any industry.
Yeah.
Very few female distillers, and I love it because, and I think that this is an interesting thing to say, and some people might get mad, but I think that women have a different perspective on flavor, and often
agree.
you can taste it, and I think that's a great thing.
I mean, not that it's necessarily. I wouldn't want to be too reductive about it, but
Sure.
I think there is a true, way that men and women often taste different.
I think so too, and but that's good because it's like someone taking a picture. It's like someone making a movie.
Absolutely.
Obviously, and everybody's different, sure, but having that unique perspective and even a physiological differentiation that's bound to produce some interesting perspectives on flavor. And that's cool. That's great.
And I think it's interesting because you look at cachaça in Brazil. It's traditionally been a man's drink.
Yeah.
It's traditionally been kind of like what your uncle, drinks.
Really?
Like it's a strong liquor. It's a liquor that you have a shot in a beer.
Mm-hmm.
It's a liquor that you like are barbecuing, making like some churrasco, and like you're drinking with your dad, your
buddies,
granddad,
right?
your cousins,
Yeah.
your buddies, whatever. But she had she had a much more kind of like soft, feminine look at it.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what was super interesting because it kept that intensity in the white cachaça. And then when you tasted the aged cachaças that she makes, they were just soft and beautiful
Supple and like rich and, yeah.
And that's really what I think attracted people to it and what attracted us to it. And so basically, like, at some point I called her up, and, my ex-wife was from the border, and so I had learned Spanish from her, and so spoke Spanish okay. And kind of in like broken Portuguese Spanish, Portuñol, as they call it, basically said, hey, Cacha, would you be interested in bringing this product to the U.S.? And she was like, yeah, I would be totally into it. And we basically, had thought about whether we would bring the brand in under what she had done traditionally.
Yeah. And so what was it as it represented in Brazil? What was the brand called?
It's called Da Quinta.
Da Quinta. Okay.
And it's basically we felt that it needed to be communicated in a different way.
Sure.
For the U.S. audience, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So we basically worked with her to design a brand.
Oh, very cool. Total collaboration.
Yeah,
Which is
very
great.
much a collaboration.
Which
and that
makes
was
her
always
buy-in
going
a lot better too, right? It's like I like the brand for the American market too.
Absolutely.
Very, very cool. Yeah.
And really, what we wanted to do was to create a brand that, both had this amazing heritage product, but also communicated what that feeling that I had had in Brazil. And so, we worked with a really great packaging designer, Mark Christow from Rook Design in New York, a Brit who's been living in the U.S. for a long time. And
They get it, man. They get it.
They're just this like very stylish dude. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to communicate like what was kind of beautiful and refined about Brazil, because often like what cachaça had been brought in as was either as a caricature of this very rich and beautiful culture, or it was something more big brand,
Right.
And we wanted to say, hey, listen, Brazil has this, Caetano Veloso, Os Mutantes, the anthropofago movement, art movement. Like has the biggest population of Japanese people outside of Japan.
Right? Isn't that crazy?
Like, it's a crazy rich culture. And so we spent a long time trying to figure out how we wanted to speak about it. But what we ended up kind of netting out on was like a brand that would evoke the time when kind of the West first really discovered Brazil. So the 1950s.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So bossa nova, Pan Am flights, Copacabana Beach exploding. And what that was really inspired by was this architect whose name is Oscar Niemeyer. And Niemeyer won the Pritzker Prize. He designed the UN building in New York. He designed Brasilia. He's a very kind of like well-known disciple of Le Corbusier. But, he has this really cool kind of curvy, funny architecture that we used to inspire the bottle.
Ah, I see.
And actually, I don't know if this is, the interesting people, but he has this really amazing quote about Brazil, which I think actually expresses kind of a lot about why I find it interesting. Mm-hmm. But he's writing about his country. He grew up in Rio. He's a Carioca guy from through and through. Mm-hmm. Super, in many, many ways. But he has this quote, and it's, "It is not the right angle that attracts me, nor the hard, inflexible line designed by man. What attracts me are sensual curves, the curves of my country's mountains, in the sinuous flow of its rivers, in the body of the beloved woman."
Oh,
I mean,
I'm sold.
Dude had a way with words.
Oh my goodness! Wow, that's brilliant. And I keep thinking about that bottle because that was one of the things that really drew me to it. Because ultimately you're drawn to the design, then you're drawn to the juice, and if both are good, I mean, it's a match made in heaven. It's perfect, right? But it has this interesting, absolutely like an upper part, or actually the whole thing is just kind of a nice, just natural kind of curve, and then there are, if I understand correctly, there's lines also etched in. Is that right? Yeah. I don't know if it's for design or if it's functional, but it looks so beautiful and it looks so exotic, but it doesn't look unfamiliar, right? Because that's the thing that will put you off as a consumer. It's like, I recognize this. I don't know why. And perhaps because the inspiration is woman. I don't know.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Could be.
And I think, it's almost like when we first started talking about this way of talking about Brazil, like Americans often don't know a ton about Brazil. Like we know sometimes a little, you look at, there's like 600,000 people of Brazilian descent in the U.S. versus 33 million people of Mexican descent, for instance. So like that's a huge like cultural, like
it's hard for us that we know Hispanic culture.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, because
we just kind of maybe being as myopic as we are at times, we just fooled all the other.
Right, just kind of
they're just like, they're all Hispanic,
but
which is not the case.
And they're very, very different cultures, but similar in some ways, but very different in others. But the way that I was losing my train of thought here, maybe, but the way that Brazil is, when we started talking about it to people, we said, "Hey, listen, 1950s, bossa nova." All of a sudden, people started telling us it was conjuring up like being in their dad's, area with his LPs, and he has
that's
those,
exactly what I was thinking of. Yeah.
Those Tom Jobim albums from the 1960s,
the cool
Stan Getz albums,
the carpet,
Playboy from the 1960s, this kind of thing where people like were first discovering it, or even like what do you call it, James Bond in Rio. In the 60s, this was kind of an era that popped into people's minds. Mm-hmm. And
it's a sexy.
It's sexy. Yeah. Did people know a lot?
No.
In the same way, maybe not. But there was kind of that cultural thing where you're like, oh, okay, like Brazilian architecture from the '60s. Okay, yeah, like there's some kind of resonance there.
Sure. Yeah. So it all starts to kind of form together. Your distiller is on board, and she has this product that you feel is much more subtle and perhaps softer than this other kind of just like really maybe hot is a good word a lot of people use.
Yeah.
And so you guys have the bottle design, you work with a British designer, and how'd you feel when you had that first mock-up bottle in your hand?
It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the first time you ever work on your own entrepreneurial project. I remember, Sash Petrosky telling Pete and myself one time, we're kind of walking through the West Village, and this was maybe a month before we launched Avua, and he's like, guys, there's the first time you launch your own business, it's the fucking craziest, scariest thing.
Yeah.
But you'll never forget it.
and you'll never have it again.
It'll never happen again.
Because you guys could do 3 other products and it would never be the same. You know what I mean?
And it's it's kind of like your first baby, you know.
That's
Like
right, yeah.
it's not the same.
No,
totally,
but
there's some kind of
it's a great
similarities.
metaphor for it. I mean, I've made a decision not to have kids, but I've made a decision to have kids via product.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, they're my kids. They cause me problems. There's some that are nicer than others. They've got their own individual personalities. It's like a little family, except that they cost even more, I think, than a baby does.
That's probably true. But probably the financial return is better.
Yes.
Hopefully.
Emotional, it's hard to say. Financial, maybe. So when did you, tell me the exact, the nice nuanced way to say. Is it avua?
Avua.
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 Okay.
So basically, avua comes from the Portuguese word voar. Voar, which means to fly, or I'm flying.
Okay.
So voar is the word to fly. Voar is like you're saying I'm flying.
I see. Okay.
But really, what it comes from is as the Portuguese started to enter in the interior Brazil, they came across lots of different types of native, communities, mostly from the Tupi language structure. And so basically there was this trade language that developed called Nhingatu. And actually this was something that a bartender friend of mine was telling me in Sao Paulo, but it's called Nhingatu. And it was basically the trade language that was used in the Amazon up until the 1890s.
Oh, really?
Most people spoke this language. They didn't speak Portuguese.
Huh.
And because the Portuguese couldn't speak Tupi and the Tupi couldn't speak Portuguese, they developed these hybrid words, one of which was avua. So avua comes from voar, but it basically means I'm flying, I'm getting high.
Okay.
Or I'm getting fucked up.
Yeah.
And so basically, like, still if you go into...
That's a classy word for such a concept.
Yeah, At the end of the day, it kind of comes down to that.
That's beautiful. Beautiful word. I mean, avoir. It's almost very, very French.
Yeah. It and a lot of people say, "Oh, is this a French word?" Well, yeah, no, but it kind of sounds similar, but it's the etymology is different.
Interesting. Yeah. So, what year was that you guys released or launched?
2013.
2013. Did you guys have both the Prata and that's how you say that one, right?
Yeah.
Prata, yeah. And then the Ambarana, is that right?
Yeah, had both of those. We were really lucky when we first kind of came into the States because we didn't really have, we were both from outside the industry. We were just kind of passionate.
And your partner's name again?
Pete.
And where's Pete? What kind of industry is he from?
He had come from the beverage industry, but more on like the business side of things. So he'd worked for Red Bull, he'd worked for Dana, and he'd worked for,
okay.
He's actually a musician as well. He used to
I'm not surprised.
in a hardcore band.
Really?
Yeah, they toured the U.S. and Europe. Had like
what were they called?
A day in black and white.
Not familiar, but it's still incredible.
Yeah.
Hardcore band. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Makes a whole lot of sense. So yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
But yeah, and so we basically, I'd say that we were just kind of like trying to figure it out. Figure out how do you talk to people about booze? How do you sell into bars? How do you like get people excited about it?
Yeah.
And we had this super lucky thing early on. And we were sitting in a coffee shop in Greenwich Village. It was me, it was Pete, it was someone who we were interviewing for a sales position. And we had two kind of dummy bottles, or actually they were like partially full dummy bottles out on the table. And this gentleman walks up, and he's probably in his like low 40s. He's wearing a Huayabera. He's wearing slacks and bowling shoes. And just kind of like a looking kind of like a guy who's kind of looking. And he was kind of walked over, and he was standing just a little bit too close, looking over the table. And I kind of looked up, and I was in my mind thinking, "Yo, what's up, buddy?" and he looks down, and he's like, "Excuse me." I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Excuse me, are you guys launching a cachaça?" And I was like, "Yeah, what cachaça? How would you even know what cachaça?" Yeah. I mean, not that many people really know what cachaça was or is. Yeah, even now. Yeah. And I was like, "Yeah, well, what do you know about cachaça?" And very like humbly, he's like, "I know a little bit." He's like, "But I'd love to hear the story. You mind telling it to me?" And so I think Pete or myself or somebody got up, told him the story, and he said, "Oh, that's really interesting. Can I try it?" And it's like, "Yeah, sure, buddy. It's like 10:15, 10:30 in the morning. Knock yourself out.
Who cares, right?"
And so he took a thought, and he said, in my memory at least, he's like, "That's the best damn cachaça I've ever had in my life. I own a couple bars downtown. I'd love to put it on the shelf." And I thought, this guy had like a shot and a beer, Jameson, and whatever.
I'm waiting for the punchline because I think I know who it is, but I just want to hear. I can film this out. This is great. Great story.
And finally, we were like, sure, yeah. When we launch, we'll get in contact. And but can you give us your email? And so he writes in his email. It's this long, complicated email. The basis is like ssashapetrosky@gmail.
Oh man.
And it was, and Sasha just was. I mean, a lot of people know this about him. He's just this lovely, super, super interested person.
Yeah.
Very kind of reserved in some ways, like quirky almost, I think would be a fair way of putting it.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
But he just kind of fell in love with the product, and he basically offered to let us launch Avua, the new milk and honey. And we had bartenders from all over New York come, who, I mean, they weren't coming to see us. They were coming for to see what milk and honey would look like. Right. So, we had the Dead Rabbits guys. We had like Robert from the New York Times. We had all these different people come, and they were coming to see Sasha. But I think that at the time, people were just like totally blown away by the Umbrana, particularly because it's so different and interesting. And it pretty much started spread. Like the moment we launched, it started spreading kind of like wildfire. I mean, we basically, it was like me and Pete going around with backpacks. We didn't have a distributor at the time.
Yeah,
we were just kind of like going around like door to door, being like, "Hey, listen, what do you think about this? What do you think about that?" And it just kept spreading. And then, it kind of took on a life of its own. And now pretty much both of us travel full time, kind of spreading the gospel of Cachaca.
That's amazing.
And
there's no way you could have saw that coming.
No, that was. I was talking with my dad today. It's like, son, there's two things that are successful in life: luck and hard work. He's like, you've had a lot of luck.
And when you start coupling that with some hard work,
you're gonna really get some results.
You gotta love it, like that. It's like this passive insult, but still compliment. You're really not as fat as I thought you would be. Right?
Exactly.
Thanks, man. I mean, is that good or?
You're like, thank you. I think.
But the root for both of these. Actually, root's probably the wrong word, but the base for both of these is just 100% raw sugar cane, and you've got the two SKUs. Because so I understand rum agricole for sure, and this is. What do you think from a rum agricole in Martinique? How is cachaça different? Is it the distillation? Is it the yeast? What would you say gives it a slightly different flavor than that of an agricole, although reminiscent, of course?
Yeah. I always call them kind of kissing cousins. I mean, they're very close in lots of ways. I mean, there's two big differences. Historical. Cachaça is much, much, much older. Cachaça is arguably the oldest distillate in the New World.
Oh, really?
I mean, the first distillation you see is somewhere between 1516 and 1532, depending on which record you're looking at.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, you look at like the rums, the English style rums come about in like the 1650s. The French style rums really start to come
later,
around
right?
In like the 1830s, 50s, something like that. So the way they developed is very different, and that's kind of a long and interesting, but not really relevant topic. But then the production style, they use different types of yeast. The types of cane they use is different. Rum agricole is obviously an AOC. Mm-hmm. They have certain styles of stills, column stills, kind of not the kind of ones we think of when we think of
right.
industrial, style.
Yeah, like a continuous.
But column stills, sometimes made of wood, sometimes other things. The length of fermentation is much longer, as far as I understand. So cachaça usually, it's hard to generalize about cachaça, but you're usually talking about 24 hours. So it's a pretty short fermentation time.
Yeah. What do you do now? Not to get too nerdy, but this is perfect to talk about this raicilla. We'll use it in contrast. So the bottle that you picked, I would have never guessed. Sometimes I can guess, and sometimes I'm right. But you picked the raicilla, the La Venenosa, RX brand out of New York, right? And this is the Tigra de Jalisco, and it is 46%, if I recall, and it's just fermented over 30 days, if I remember correctly.
Wow.
Really, really, really long time. You get the funk, you get the acid, and you get the bright. You get everything that any kind of distillate would be, and it's a single distillate. So it's pretty interesting. So what do you think about the flavor on that guy?
I mean, I love this raicilla. our in full disclosure is a buddy, and
I mean, the juice speaks for itself, though. He could be a dick, and you'd still drink it.
It would still be amazing.
Yeah, exactly.
But I remember when I think I had this for the first time at BioWell after we brought it in the East Village, and I tasted it. I was like, "What is like?"
Exactly.
It was one of those mind blowing kind of things for me, where I was just like, "This is agave spirit." Like,
right.
I thought I knew that mezcal was super interesting. Like, Oaxacan mezcal was super weird and interesting, and like tequila is obviously an amazing spirit, but like this was like,
this is Zappa.
Yeah, that is a great way.
This is Zappa because I can't predict where it's going, and drinking it the first time is not the same as drinking it right now.
Yeah,
it's completely different, but so well formed and so multifaceted. You just like its own galaxy of flavor. Not to oversell it, but it's insane. So to contrast that, because this is a very long fermentation time, you get a lot of changes in pH when you just leave that shit out there, right?
Absolutely.
So you guys just are rather fermenting in approximately 24 hours or less than 24 hours. You probably get a tighter, more succinct kind of flavor without the funkiness that does come from leaving out sugar juice.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the, I think that's one of the things, like with cachaça, I get a flavor. I would say cachaça is kind of like halfway between a rum and a tequila in its flavor profile.
Yeah.
Whereas Martinique rum or French style rum is it's much more fruity to me. Like cachaça always feels, or good cachaça feels very tied to the prime material. Mm-hmm. Whereas the agricoles have like this deep and interesting funk to them.
Yeah. It's that fruity funk it's like cheesy fruit funk.
Yeah.
It's so strange. You get it in mezcal, but like with agricoles, it's very, very different. But it's reined in with the cachaça, Avua especially. Like it's tighter. It's not as like, what's the word? Fragmented. It's not as abrupt.
Yeah. And I mean, like, I love agricoles. Like, there's a lot of like beautiful, beautiful stuff to agricoles. But agricoles are often, at least compared to Avua, like they're often bigger.
Yeah,
they're a lot bigger.
But not necessarily. That's not always good. I mean, so what is it? Open air fermentation for you guys?
Yep, open air. Just got all wild yeast. That's the way they make cachaça in this farm since the 1700s.
Where's the farm located, roughly?
It's about 4 hours north of Rio, the city of Rio. It's in the state. You basically kind of like wend your way up through the mountains, and it's this pretty remote area. The nearest village is like 2,000 people, and it's like an hour away, basically.
What's the high altitude, low altitude, medium?
I'd say medium. Probably we're talking like 6, maybe 4,000 feet.
Oh wow, that's actually pretty.
It's a pretty high actually.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's you kind of like, and so basically like they just, the way cachaça developed, as far as we know, is basically there were these, the Portuguese brought over slaves from Angola, and they forbid them from drinking.
Bastards.
Which is just terrible because you're working in these fields all the time.
Can I get it?
Like,
no.
It's hard.
Yeah. Damn it, really?
No. Yeah. So, I mean, just a little being dicks, obviously.
Yeah.
But basically what happened is they took, they would take cane, they would press it, and they would form the juice. Well, I mean, there's really no base thing for spirits that has the sugar content or the easily fermentable sugar content that sugarcane juice has.
Unparalleled. Yeah, absolutely.
And so the yeast just loves it. It just falls in and it starts to go off on its own.
Probably within like a matter of minutes, I imagine. Yeah,
pretty much. And like if you go to like Cuba or like Miami or parts of the Caribbean, you often have garapa, which is sugarcane juice.
Oh, okay.
It's like a traditional thing that people just kind of drink. Mm-hmm. And you notice it if it sits out for a little while. You're like, okay, a little garapa kombucha action.
Why is it bubbling, man?
This is crazy.
Volatile stuff. It really is,
So that's kind of how they still do it in cachaça today.
That's amazing. And so what kind of distillation, if you guys talk about this stuff, you talking pot distillation, are you talking column? How is it? It's probably different, obviously, than agricole.
It's pod distillation. In cachaça in general, like, kind of like a lot of sugarcane spirits, it's a little bit of the Wild West.
Yeah.
Even agricole, I think, would be the exception to that. So really, it's less kind of like these kind of AOC things, which are inspired by French wine, and more kind of like, here's the history, here's the tradition of this area, right? So basically, like in cachaça, they largely use pot stills for good artisanal cachaça. they have like a pretty unique style of still.
Yeah.
I mean, ours is like, it's this kind of alembic, what they call alembic still. So it's like copper pot still, but then there's a column that ascends from the actual bulb itself. And so they kind of fractionate on two levels. They fractionate like on the plating, and then they also fractionate on the gooseneck.
Very cool.
And our producer insists that adds creaminess to.
Sure. I mean, she would, she knows. So it's bound to be 2 distillations.
Or one distillation.
No kidding.
Yeah.
What's bottle proof on it?
Bottle proof is 42. It's actually distilled 2 proof.
That's amazing.
So they basically start like it starts coming out. The hearts start coming off the still. I think like at 48%.
Yeah.
And then, it switches to tails. They usually make the second cut around 39%, and just like how that blends in comes out 42.
That's amazing. That is amazing. Because it's a completely different, like from rum. I mean, you talk about you just distill it to hot. Not all rum, but a lot of rums, commercial rums, one that comes to mind, right? But you distill the shit out of it, comes out 92%. You water it down. Yeah. So, but the thing that you guys are doing is that you're never ever introducing anything that's not cachaça, right?
Well, and that's
amazing.
And that's what I think is interesting about artisanal cachaças like Avua. Like it's basically like ours is all single estate. Like even the piece of wood that are used to age in the Amburana, that's from trees that grow on the same farm. That's like crazy. It's literally like everything comes from this area except.
Is there Cooper? There's got to be Coopers then.
Yeah, it's funny in Brazil. You have like a lot of the people that end up working on cachaça distilleries. These are I don't know how to exactly describe them, but they're almost like tribes of people that have been doing it for a long, long time.
Yeah,
and they're migratory. So basically, they will spend a year or 2 years in one producer, a year or 2 years in another producer.
How many people are we talking? Talking tribes with like 10,
20
50?
maybe.
No kidding.
Like 2 or 3 families.
Wow, that's venture capitalism at its finest.
Yeah, exactly.
That is what it looks like before it made its way to the West, right?
Exactly.
We'll help you guys launch, and then we're gonna, once you guys get up and running, we'll go to the next thing. That's amazing.
And I mean, you have the kind of the distilling families, which have their own kind of ways of doing things, but you'll often see like ideas kind of spread through these kind of migration patterns.
Yeah.
But you also have these traveling coopers, and they basically get in a car and they'll drive all throughout Minas Gerais, which is one of the core cachaça producing areas, which is huge states, probably bigger than Texas, maybe even. And then like they'll go into Rio, they'll go in sometimes into São Paulo. They'll just basically drive around, and they know how to make these barrels.
They look the same as the barrels that we're accustomed to in Kentucky?
They're pretty different, actually. Yeah. They have lots of different types of barrels. It's fair to call them vats.
Okay, vats. Okay.
These trees. So like Amburana, the one that we kind of introduced, which is to me one of the really interesting.
It's insanely good. It's so good.
Like those they make into vats which might be almost 20 feet tall,
Holy
10 feet diameter.
Are you kidding me?
So a lot bigger than kind of the traditional.
Oh, it's bigger than a fermentation vat in most places.
Yeah. And it's actually interesting because they're very old. Like they're probably almost 25 years old. So Amburana is actually a threatened species. Okay. So you can't make new vats.
Oh. Wow.
Unless you go through a very kind of long government process where you plant a certain number of
reforestation,
trees, reforestation. And our producer is very conscientious about that. But what these vats are really, really old. I mean,
wow.
I don't even know of another kind of wood that you would.
I can't think of something you would use that much. but being so large, though, I mean, it's still going to be effective.
I think that's a lot of.
That's the difference, because you think about the 55 or 53 gallon barrels you use for whiskey. Like you kind of pull most of this stuff out over maybe, let's say, 3 sittings, 3 restings.
Yeah.
But with something that's that large, and then because the other thing too is like bourbon. Get nerdy for a second. The bourbon that's coming in is pretty high.
Yeah.
So the higher the alcohol, obviously, is going to pull more of that stuff out. But since your max single distillation coming out at 48, you said, which you could take the heads and if you wanted, which are a little bit higher, but it's going to be nicer. It's going to be more subtle because it's not going to be as hot going into the barrel and pulling that stuff out. And people will correct me, and that's totally fine. But that means, I think, that you get a nice balance of evaporation and absorbing the flavor of that wood over about how long with the Amburana, if you guys talk about it?
Roughly 2 years. I mean,
amazing.
I'd say in Brazil you don't often see like hyper-aged things.
Yeah.
I mean, you do from time to time with oak, but like to me, I've had a lot of different Brazilian wood-aged spirits down there, and when you start to get beyond 6 years, it really starts to overwhelm the distillate.
I see.
So a lot of times kind of the magic number, at least to me, and my palate is like around 2 years.
Yeah, and so the Amberana is that also around 42?
That's a little bit less.
I was going to say, because you get the evaporation and stuff. So this is the thing. I didn't know what it was when someone gave it to me. And they said, this is not oak. This is some other kind of wood. And I'm like, okay, well, all right, great. I don't even know what the tree looks like. I don't even know how you chop it. Fair enough, it's hardwood, lightwood, I don't know. It doesn't matter. But I tasted it and I was like, this is such a beautiful balance of kind of like vanilla and silk and sugar and wood. But it was such a subtle kind of light and fluffiness to the wood. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
instead of being so heavy-handed and so charred.
Yeah.
And you guys have done something insanely beautiful with that spirit. I mean, it's a very, very special thing. Hence why I probably can't get a hold of it very often, because it's like you guys cycle through it so much. But what's the plan for that one, which bound to be even a more uphill battle in terms of consumer education? How do you guys approach that?
I mean, a lot of it we take kind of notes from our brethren in mezcal.
Yeah.
I think that what's been great about, mezcal, like the way that it has grown and has had a lot to do with bartender education. To be able to know, like, what's the difference between a tempestate, cupriata, and then when you start to get into, like, the mezcals that are not from Oaxaca, or the agave spirits, which are not from, like,
Raicilla, Bacanora,
Sotol, all that stuff is super interesting, but it had to have, like, an entry point.
Yeah.
So to me, it's like, what we try and do is to say, well, you guys thought cachaça was this way. You thought it was a hot spirit used only for caipirinhas, pretty industrial, because that's mostly what we got until 2008, maybe when blonde kind of came into the market. And, stuff that in Brazil would be very value. And say, okay, you thought an industrial cachaça, you thought cachaça was only industrial. Let me blow your mind with Amberana.
Oh, yeah.
And then kind of like we spend a lot of time doing education. So like tomorrow or on Tuesday, I'm going to go down to San Antonio.
Where are you going, by the way?
Juniper Tower.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Okay. Benjamin, right?
Yeah. So Benjamin has kindly offered a spot. So we're going to do like a master class for bartenders across San Antonio.
Wow.
Like we do a lot with that. We're doing like actually an interesting kind of Avua kind of interview series where with our friends with Mapa de Cachaça, so they're helping to interview like Dave Wondrich, and we're gonna have something released in about a month.
Yeah, for the site, for social. How are you guys releasing it?
It's mostly through so it's through the site Mapa de Cachaça. Okay. So they're really doing it mostly through social. I'm not sure exactly how they're going to put it out there, but it's
great though.
It's interviews with kind of like people who but it's very Cachaça focused. Like,
sure.
But
that's, we both understand how socialization is the key.
Yeah.
So Toll for me, Cachaça for you. I mean, people want to know.
Absolutely.
If it's honest, they want to know.
Absolutely.
Now, if you're hiding behind something, obviously it's always a different conversation. People are very, very apprehensive. But when you talk about, obviously you're a disarming guy, just like coming in here and sitting with you. It's like, no, you're shooting me straight. It's very, very wonderful because products speak for themselves too. It's almost like, you got to tell people about it and you got to sell it, but like, it's brilliant juice.
Well, and that's the thing I think with, I'm sure you find this with Sotol or Bacanora or these kind of like, agave spirits that have a very, very long tradition.
Yeah.
But nobody really knows what they are. It's kind of like you have to hear it a number of times.
Yeah, or in a different way even.
Or in a different way.
Because you talk about having to rebrand this concept that works in Brazil, but it wouldn't work the same way. You have to appeal to these Western sensibilities or lack thereof, right?
Yeah.
It's like, you play to the Wild West, you put a gun on your label? Right. What exactly do you do? It's a totally different thing over here. But it is fun, like that constant process of being on the road, being on the stage, being collaborative with people that are genuinely interested. I think you have no larger group of people that are incredibly academic and just engaged about the knowledge than any other industry. I mean, science perhaps, right? But for outside of that, I don't know, man. Everybody's kind of in their little silo. But you talk about this industry, people they have this lust for information.
It's such a great industry for sharing that information.
Yeah.
Because that's what do you do when you sit around a table?
That's right.
You share, right? You share food that somebody made. You share a drink that somebody made. You share, have you tried this amazing raicilla? Have you tried this amazing sotol? have you tried this amazing cachaça? Like, there are these things that you have to, like, it's the joy of sitting around a table. It's the same experience maybe that, sitting around that Brazilian table and having everybody drink the same thing. They want to do it because they want to share a cool experience. It's
communal.
Like, it's communal.
It's not just singular, right?
Yeah, and that's where the fun bit is in life. I mean, singular stuff is fun too, but like
not that much,
quite as much fun.
Go ahead and write your concept record; it'll be fine. Like no one will really it doesn't always resonate,
Yeah.
But writing that stuff that involves other people, that's collaborative, So you've got this Texas tour. You're here, you go from New York to here. I'm sure you and your business partner Pete are touring all over the place, kind of working that stuff. So what, if you can talk about it, is what's next? Not that this isn't enough.
Yeah,
it's never that way. But I know if you're driven, and I know you've got that entrepreneurial spirit or whatnot. You guys thinking about doing other things?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the first thing we're really focused on right now is the Olympics are coming up in Rio.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So we kind of want to spread the gospel of cachaça, and this is a great moment for people to put it on their bar programs and for consumers to learn about it in stores, and I think that's increasingly happening. We're kind of going out and encouraging that to happen.
The world's coming to your playground.
Exactly.
You're almost a captive audience to listen about cachaça. It's perfect opportunity, right?
Exactly.
Saves you lots of money from travel. It's going to show up,
We are kind of we're as the cachaça continues to grow and start to get out there, I think that we will probably are interested in bringing in different stuff, but this is part of a larger concept that Pete and I have been working on now with some other friends in the industry. But really the idea is to find kind of unique gems, and that need education, need some love in categories that are weird and interesting, or maybe a different way of looking at those categories.
Right.
So we're starting to kind of see, well, what's next there. I mean, we'll see where it all goes, but
it's
for now, cachaça is the
because if the past is any predictor of the future, it's going to seem random. There's the law degree, which obviously I'm sure comes into play still.
It's handy, yeah.
And
handy.
then you've got that. You get the music background, which helps you perform, I think. In a sense,
absolutely.
Think about details, think about composition, but not on not a musical scale only. But booze is that way. Booze is just notes, right?
Yeah.
The perfect triad.
That's
the way I look at it. And I got I was talking about some booze the other day. And I'm like, what it's really like? It's like this pop song. It's like the Beatles, and there's like, you always talk about music, man. What's the deal? Well, it's the only thing I can actually understand. I mean, you can talk about movies, but it's a little more esoteric. But music, people get music. They really do.
I think that's a great way of looking at it. It's like, to compare a booze to music, or a cocktail to music, or food to music, that makes sense. If you go into the movie realm, it's like, it's so much long form,
Absolutely.
A movie is sitting down to El Bulli for a 15-course small plate meal, maybe. Okay,
I mean,
not that I've ever had a chance to do that.
The Citizen Kane of spirits. What does that mean? Exactly. That's a black and white movie. I'm thinking in color here. This doesn't even apply. That's music's where it's at. And we kind of end on this, but you mentioned maybe or suggested that you're playing again, or that you're writing again. Is that coming up in your life again?
I'd say playing again. We were talking about this a little bit earlier, but somebody was somebody in the family repairs grand pianos, and so he had this really cool Mason and Hamlin grand,
that's right. Yeah.
which was from the late 1800s, and it used to be in a brothel in New Orleans. Which was great.
The stories that piano could tell.
And it's this chestnut looking piano with this gold leaf, so you can see it fitting quite well like an 1800s brothel in New Orleans. But anyway, sometimes
I think I could fit in an 1800 brothel. as an aside, sorry.
I think that feels good. It feels good. Let's bring this back.
With my name on it. Anyway, sorry.
And so he, this piano had an interesting life. It moved to Galveston and was there for a long time, and then in one of the hurricanes, one of the storms, it got completely ruined. And so he brought it to his little shop on top of a hill in Blanco, Texas, or outside of Blanco, Texas, and he spent about a year and a half reworking this. And I went there recently, and I sat down, and I started playing, and it was like it had never left.
Wow.
And part of it maybe was a moment in time. Part of it's the beauty of the instrument, but your fingers start to move, and it works.
It all makes sense again.
So maybe it's coming back. I don't know. We'll see.
I hope so. It never leaves, man.
It never leaves. Yeah.
It really never does. Music, it haunts you, but in the most pleasant of ways. I'm not losing sleep over it. I'll put it that way.
That's a great way of putting it. It haunts you in a very pleasant way.
We can coexist. It's like Ghost Dad. Anyway. Well, it's been brilliant chatting, and thanks so much for doing that. I love that everybody's open to chatting. Like no one, I don't expect anybody knows who the fuck I am, but the fact that you came in to town, obviously you're going to San Antonio, but talking Cachaca with me, talking music, talking marriage law, like all these things, man. So many things we have in common. It's been brilliant getting to know you, and I hope we don't stop here. So thanks so much, Nate, for chatting with me.
Brother. Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Well, there we have it. Another great chat, this time with Nate Casablanca Whitehouse, one of the co-founders of Avua, Cachaca, of course, from the lovely Brazil. I've had both what we could call a Blanco, Cachaca, and the Amberana, aged no less than 2 years, I think. It's roughly 2 to 3 years in these massive endangered wood casks. It's it's totally different world, Cachaca, right? I mean, it's in essence a rum agricole, but the culture and the people and the production methods are so different. And it's really wonderful to hear Nate's story about bringing this amazing product into America just so he could drink it himself. Sometimes that's how all these great ideas start, is we just don't have the right booze for when we want to sit down and enjoy a glass. So what do? We import it. So thanks everybody for listening to Show to V with Mike G. I hope you're enjoying the show, these conversations. I hope you're learning. I'm learning about agave. I'm learning about cachaça. Learning about owning and operating bars and restaurants. It's been a brilliant experience thus far for me, and I really appreciate you keeping tuned in. So no matter what you're drinking this fine spring mojito at Caipirinha, or if you're watching episodes of 30 Rock on Netflix, please keep dancing.